All right, welcome back to another episode of your morning cup of Q and J. So today's episode, we have a very special guest, my very good friend Saira here with us today. So welcome, Saira. So the
Thank
reason,
you.
okay, yeah, well, one of the reasons that I invited Saira to be part of our podcast is because I've been given a lot of mental health first aid course. I think I have given like 14 already since the pandemic hit, all virtual. And majority of the attendees, participants through my mental health first aid are actually all of them are adults. Most of them, majority of them are white folks. And part of the mental health first aid training, we talked toward the end, we did talk a lot about self-care. And a lot of attendees are parents or moms, single moms, or all that. So I have heard a lot of their feedback, stories, challenges, opportunities as moms working with their kids. Some of them have very young ones, some of them have teenagers. So I have heard a lot of their stories, which is awesome. I really appreciate their stories, giving me, because I don't have my kids. I don't have any kids. So give me that perspective. What's it like to be a mom, to be a parent during this pandemic economic crisis? And one thing that I noticed that I have not heard from any parent of color about their struggles as a mom, during this pandemic crisis and everything. So Saira, I thought of you, that like, again, like is I a little bit selfishly, Q, I was kind of sharing with Q that selfishly, I just want to learn more. So I thought of you, you I saw you through your window, you and your daughter a couple of days ago when I picked up kombucha. So I just want, so I just thought that it would be awesome for you to be on it, to just kind of share, your experience, your thoughts, what's it like to be a mom during this pandemic time. I know doing our weekly ITP Tuesday night, you and Rebecca would share a little bit, like so that's why like it just got me very interested. So, and actually, before we dive into that topic, what's it like to be a mom, especially a mom, a person of color and a mom during this crisis time? Saira, let's talk about your name, your identity, because I know that you go by a couple names, and I'm just, like me, I think like you, we all have a couple different names, and then we have different people pronounce us different names. So I would like to listen to that.
Thank you. Thanks, JR. That's really interesting. I appreciate the opportunity to talk about my different names. So my first name is Saira, and I can often anglicize it for people who can't half roll the R. So Saira is also fine, but that's not how my name is pronounced. And I'm not gonna. I used to really care if people could pronounce the half R, like the half roll, the Saira. You would hear like people say it with a D or whatever, and it doesn't bother me anymore. Saira, fine. That's my name. And Yasmine is my middle name. And my last name is Hamidi, which is actually not really my family's last name. My eldest uncle had changed it when he moved to like England, I think, because there were so many Khans, and like Khan is like our actual name, which delineates our. It's like one of the biggest tribes. Anyway, so my family means a lot to me. My last name doesn't mean that much to me. Oh, there I said it. But my first two names actually are the ones I hold dear. And when I started performing more, like I never really got the support to be an actor. When I was younger, I kept hearing, Muslim girls don't act. That was what I was told. So I started performing under my middle name, Yasmine, and then I have a nickname called Sweets because I have an addiction to sugar, and it's like an ode to my love for sugar. So Yasmine Sweets became my performer's name. Like that's what I would use when I'd perform it. It gave me a kind of shelter too. I think like, being Muslim and South Asian communities here, we tend to be conservative, and sometimes the performances I was doing might have been questionable to those conservative mentalities. And so it gave me a layer of of safety. It also gave me a layer of, I don't know, some type of, gave me artistic license. Like, okay, well, now that I'm performing under my middle name, I can do more things and it's less attached to me. So it was in, and people still can't pronounce the middle one either. It's a soft S. Yes. It's like saying yes, mean, like, yes, she's mean, but I'm not. I mean, I could be. And then you cut out the she's and then say yes, mean. And so that's yes, mean. Anyway, so it's a soft S. In any case, that's like the short story behind my names. Do you have any questions?
I remember, yeah, a couple of years ago when we were talking, remember we had this conversation about like who you feel comfortable calling you Sarah versus or Yasmine. That distinction. Can you talk a little bit more about that?
Yeah, I think so some people who are really close to me know me as Yasmine, and that's fine. And because they're special, but I think the people closest to me will call me Saira. Like I think that in like the performance world, the people closest to me know my first name.
I see. Awesome. Yeah. And the reason I'm interested in this topic is that, I go by JR. People in my world know my JR. And and I have my own legal name, which is I never use it except when I had to go to DMV, stupid DMV. So, and I have my childhood name that only like my childhood name only literally a handful of people know it and call me. And then I have my other childhood name that I grew up with, that again, only probably 2 dozens of people that know that name will call me by that name. So, and yeah, so there's that distinction, and then probably had to do with, our Asian cultures. Sometimes that we do have, especially Chinese, that like we do have family name, social name, or even back in the days, political names and stuff like that. So it's very interesting. So Q, how about you? Do you have some of those names that like you use in different circumstances?
Yeah, so my legal name is Nam Quang Lei, and I actually do not have an Gregorian English name. And I know a lot of immigrant families, they're like, because they're trying to assimilate. And I know statistically, if you have a non-English name, your hiring chances decrease exponentially. It's super fucked up, but this is the word we're in. But my parents never gave me one, and I always really loved my name. So I was always confused when growing up, other Vietnamese kids were like, "You don't have an English name?" I'm like, "No, why? I only need one name." So I'm a little bit of an anomaly. But the nickname that I go by is Guian. But Guian is actually a really unisex name in a lot of ways. So when I would go to school and people would pronounce it as Quinn, which is also a unisex name, I actually really liked that pronunciation. So for me, I was like, even though that's not the way it's supposed to be pronounced, I actually quite like it a lot. So even oscillating between it's like my unofficial English name, even though it's still spelled the same, like Quyen, and I have a lot of sympathy too, because like Vietnamese we don't have hard consonants. So being like, okay, even though it says Q, just say almost like Guang, and it's hard, and I get it. Vietnamese is a hard language, so I have a lot of sympathy. I try to give a lot of leeway. I think my pen name is Q, Q.Lei or L.E. And there's a whole story behind it. The first is that I was too lazy to type out my full name one day. that is real. But I was also this was back in the day, and it was when the late film critic Roger Ebert, he and I actually corresponded quite a bit over email. I know, yeah, he was a huge influence on my filmmaking endeavors. And he had a blog, and I was just I was just very nervous 20-year-old. I was literally 20 years old, and I was like, oh my god, someone I really admire. And I was just like, okay, I'm gonna go like Q, because both my parents have pen names when they write. So yeah, I go by I just like kind of almost like you break it down. So when I hear my full name Nam Quang, I'm like, I'm either at the DMV or I am in serious trouble. But yeah.
Exactly, yes. And Q, like you, that like not like you, but like many millions of Asian Americans, immigrants, came here that we were given Anglo-Saxon English name, and I hate it. I hate it so bad that after high school, when I was older, that I stopped using that. Well, I stopped using that name since I was very young, and I just go by JR. You know, at least back in the '90s, like there's rarely people named after JR. I think so. I just picked two of my favorite alphabets and just put it together. That's it. Simple as that. So yeah. So yeah. So okay. So back to you, Sarah. So also, I remember when I first met you, you introduced me the um, the word Desi. So prior to that, I had
Desi,
no huh?
Desi, Desi,
Daisy. I'm
Desi.
sorry. Yeah, the
Yeah, that's right.
yes. And yeah, like prior knowing you, I did not know what that means. That was so new to me. And I think for majority of people, even Asian American Asians or Americans don't even know what that mean. Can you please tell us more about that?
Sure. No, that's a really good question. I think unless you've grown up with a lot of South Asian folks, um, you may not be familiar with the name. Q, you're in California, right? I feel like, are you familiar? Yeah. I was like, yeah, I grew up in the Bay. So there's lots of us. And we're not hiding like here in Colorado. We're like all in Aurora, you know, it's where we are. But yeah, so Desi, it's interesting. I've noticed that my family back home, so my parents are Indian and I was born in Pakistan. And so my family is all over the world. Thank you, the British. And uh, I find that my family on the subcontinent, they don't really identify like that. Like I find that more people, so basically Desi comes from the word Desh, depending on which South Asian language you're using, but and it means like of the land, right? Like native, basically. I'm like giving a gross generalization, and I wish I had known this question was coming. So no. Anyhow, here we are in my vulnerable state. I could be wrong, but that's how I understand it at this moment at 10:20 on this Friday. But anyhow, it refers to like of the land, right? So most people, like my family back home, they call themselves like Indian or Pakistani, and but I find that South Asian folks in the diaspora tend to identify as Desi. And for me, I really liked it because I didn't have to choose between this like false human-made, distinction between India and Pakistan. And it all was one place anyway at some point. And I know there's many, many different people in South Asia, but it refers to people who are from South Asia, generally speaking, to include like Bhutan and Bangladesh and Nepal and like that area. And I find that most folks who are in the diaspora use it more than people living in those countries. Long answer. There we have it. But they see, and I like it. And I think like, I know a lot of like leftist radical desis, and like we tend to use it more. And I don't know if I haven't really actually read any reports or even looked into this, but it just occurs to me. I wonder if that's more of like a, somehow wrapped up into a political diaspora identity also. Like, I'm not sure, but I could guess. Because I find that folks who aren't, who don't share a lot of my politics, where they see also don't identify as such. So maybe there's a connection there, maybe not.
Yes. And the reason I brought this up, Daisy, is that, and you two know that like my background, well, before pandemic, majority of my professional speeches were at higher education universities across the country. And only about 4 years ago, 3, 4 years ago, I noticed that the word Daisy started popping up more and more to be more inclusive of college students that what their parents, what they identify as South Asian, at the same time they don't really want to be identified as Indian per se, but they want to identify as South Asian Americans. and South Asian Americans. I think that is a little bit too long. So I don't know. I think and then I noticed that, and then from there they start calling themselves more Desi. So a lot of time when I give speeches, the invitation flyer would be Asian Americans, Desis, Pacific Islanders, students. So yeah, go ahead. Yes.
Also, I was thinking, this also just occurred to me, but I feel like, you know, Pakistan is predominantly Muslim, right? And I wonder if there are folks who are from Pakistan who live here. Maybe this is a thought, just an idea, who who don't want to like disclose that they're Muslim and from Pakistan. Because when you say you're from Pakistan, there's like a major assumption that like you're going to be Muslim, even though there's other minorities in there. You know what I mean? Like and so because of like the rampant Islamophobia, maybe people were like, oh, I'm Desi, so that like so as not to stir the pot, like, oh, I'm like South Asian. Y'all don't need to know I'm exactly from Pakistan or Bangladesh or whatever. You know what I mean? Like I wonder if that also hides like a layer of religious identity, perhaps.
Yes, yeah. What's that guy? He was on Netflix.
Hassan Minaj. Yeah, I don't love him. I'm not gonna lie, but whatever, he's fine. Yeah, Hassan. I think he goes by Hassan.
Yes,
the correct pronunciation of that name. But yeah, I think he's Indian. He's Indian Muslim, right? Like that's his family. Yeah.
Yes, and he uses the word Desi a lot too, or when he referred to himself. So interesting. So cool. So by the way, for those that out there don't know how Saira and I met, we met through interactive theater long time ago. Oh my god! And earlier I forgot to announce that we also have another special guest, little Nook. She's a little baby. How old is she, Q?
She is about 8 weeks old.
Oh
She's very small. Usually you bring home a kitten around 12 weeks, but her mom abandoned her.
Yeah.
So I'm just holding her because she wanted cuddles.
You can keep her on as long you want. Like I love. So back to Saira and I met through interactive theater project, which I started be part of it in 2014. No, 2004. 2004, when I was in college. And I think I met Saira in 2011 when I rejoined interactive theater. So both of us. So Saira, if people out there don't know, she's an actress. She's also a voice over personnel. Yes, she does voiceover too. So yeah, and Sarah just had like many different amazing multi-talent. So I just want to highlight that before we dive into the topic. What's it like to be a mom, like more specifically a Muslim mom, like a Desi mom in Colorado, in suburb of Denver during this pandemic time, and the reason I want to mention your multiple talents is because I don't want people to just cast you that because you're a mom and that's your only identity. She has so many different talents and so many different identities. So what's up, Saira? What's it like?
What's up, everyone? Thanks for that, JR, to like recognize my multiple realities and identities and things that I do. One thing that just came to mind, that didn't just come to mind, it's something I've been struggling with. So I recently started a new position and I love it. And it's been great. But the questions like, oh, so what do you like to do outside of work? Or, tell us about yourself type of question, like when you get to know your new colleagues. And it's all weird because it's a remote situation. So like it's a little awkward. But I found myself stuck. Like I had to write a bio, for the staff page. And I was like, oh, I think I'm having a bit of an existential crisis. Like I don't know how to talk about myself anymore. And I'm like, what do I focus on? Do I tell you this? Do I tell you that? Like what about me? Like what part of me makes sense for this situation? And I used to never have a problem with that. Or maybe never is not the right word, but I used to not often have the problem. And I think part of it is, so my child is 5, and which is like wild to me. But it's so much has been about being a mother and like taking care of my child and focusing on my child that like I think I'm having to reinvent or redefine myself now at this point in my life, because now she's getting older, now she's in kindergarten, and so I think that's what I'm struggling with. I'm like, what about me? Like, what am I? What do I want to cultivate about myself now? And I think that's something that being, in this pretty extreme isolation, that JR, like I virtually haven't left my house like since March. So it's been pretty intense. And I'm like very social and very outgoing. So this has been really a shift. I feel like sometimes I'm hanging on by a thread, like I'm about to lose it. But so far, hanging in there. But yeah, I think this has given me a lot of opportunity to reflect and stuff because, I'm just home, not just home. It's like hella busy, but home. And I'm struggling with like identifying who I am now because everything had been about taking care of this child and working full time and never being home. And it was just like so busy and hard to have two working parents and take care of a child. I'm like, this is not, man, this country, this setup is not like here to support us. Like you can't have I literally had to choose. I'm like, do I have another child or no? Like I actually can't afford to have another child. So here and also there's other reasons, but like, it's impossible to be working and have a young child. And now we're all here and remote and it's like a different challenge. And I just have to say, like, whatever gripes I might share and whatever challenges I might share, I like recognize and deeply appreciate the privilege that I have to be able to stay home. And the fact that I have literally been in my house since basically March. I go to my sister's, who's like a couple houses down, and I consider her my extended household, but like it is a massive privilege. I recognize that, I acknowledge it, and I actually really appreciate it. So here we are.
Nice. So yeah, and what's one common theme again from teaching that I heard from these parents saying, being at home during this pandemic time is that they have to work full time, and especially if their child is between age 3 to 14, sometimes they have to switch roles. They have to go from parents, being a mom, to be a school teacher, to be an after school teacher, to be the PE teacher. And when the summer came around, they had to become a summer camp counselor, and at night they have to become a mom again. So do you go through that process too? And what was it like to have to play those multiple roles?
Yeah, that's a really thoughtful question. I appreciate that. It can sometimes feel like Jekyll and Hyde, where if I'm in the middle of something and so my child is in kindergarten, and I think that with younger children, it could be much harder. But I mean, she started a new school now and it's remote, but the remote thing, it's not like they're going to sit at the computer from 8 to 5 while you're in meetings and working. It's like they have hella breaks. And I'm like, what do you got done early? Oh my God. Like, come on, school. You know what I mean? And then they have asynchronous learning like every other Friday. So that's like, I remember once I had a Friday off and I was like, oh my God, if I didn't have this Friday off, like, I don't know how you would be doing all of your schoolwork, because it was like basically homeschooling. Like, here's the assignment. Let me sit here and talk you through it. Let's do each of your exercises. And it's just a lot. And no, it's actually it's just really challenging. Then you have to feed the child and you're like, okay, so hang on. And I'd be like, oh, I'm in the middle of a meeting. I got to get my kid on her remote class. Hold on a second, and it's just like so much to keep in mind and like in your calendar and shifting from like one role to the next. But the Jekyll and Hyde moments really come up when like she's right here and I'm like in the middle of something. She's like, look here, look, mom, look. And I'm like, I need you to stop talking to me right now. Okay. Like, I'm gonna flip out. So that's when it gets really challenging. And then I feel like a big jerk because I feel like, and this is not like in those moments, this is pretty much all the time where I'm like struggling. I'm like, okay, I'm an asshole mom because I can't, like, I'm here. And she's like, there was this whole, when we first started remote life, it was like, oh, we're at home together, so now you can hang out with me. And I'm like, no, but actually I'm working. And so there are these expectations of me as a mother and then of me as an employee, right? And at some point I feel like I'm not doing, like the boundaries are so blurred that like motherhood, like that never stops, but the work stuff, I'm like, oh, I felt like I was never stopping either of them. Like, oh, it's like late at night, I gotta just check this one thing or whatever. then I felt like I was doing a shitty job at both. But I think ultimately now that I have this new job that I really like and people are super flexible and understanding and it's great. I feel like the work thing slowly, and also because it's new, it's like I don't feel super overworked yet. And I hope that the boundaries stay firm. But like, I still feel like, okay, so I'm doing fine at work, but I still feel like kind of a shitty mom. That's just something I'm holding, and oh well, there it is.
Yeah, thank you for sharing that. So, a couple months, last month, well, 2 months ago, I was very fortunate that a Fortune 500 company uh, is wanted to volunteer their time, or their part one, their ERG, Employee Resource Group, want to volunteer for NAPIMA, the nonprofit that we used to work for. So the way that we figure out an idea, let's do a focus group on mental health. And so they did. They were able to gather the employees, and we did 2 sessions of focus groups. And it was very interesting because one of the feedback that I received from focus group from these employees, especially from moms or females, is that they feel that they are being hard, they are being, they're not doing both good. They're not being a mom, and their job suffers, and they just feel like it's just too much for them. They feel like, and some of them on top of working 8 hours per day, some of them still have to work 10 hours because pandemic, and on top of that, they have to take care of their child with children. And that is one feedback that I received, that they feel like they are failing on both ends. That's one. And second is that they have this fear that it's going to look bad at their job performance, because doing a meeting like this, sometimes they do really just have to hop off for 5 minutes to feed their child, whatever, make sure that they child. Well, I still remember one of the training I was doing. I think one of the kids fell down, or like was bleeding or something. The mom had to go take care of it. It was like, and they're afraid that like it's gonna look bad in front of their upper management, because as we know, those people in position right now in the upper management, they are older. What that means is their kids are older. Maybe their kids are in college, so they don't have, they might understand rationally, but they might not really understand emotionally. It's just like me. I understand, but I don't really understand. So they are afraid that it going to look bad on their job performances. So when it comes to those quarterly or end of the year reviews, they're afraid that they might get passed on for promotion or for raise, because you know just because they have to take care of their young ones. So yeah. So with that being said, like, what do you think? And Q, please feel free to jump in. Like, what do you think that what can we do to balance this out? What can other young mothers out there do? I don't know. I'm just throwing
Yeah.
this question out.
No, I think this is a great question. I do not have children that I know of. Um, I love that joke. It's just so inappropriate. It makes no sense. Well, I actually, I'm going to try my best to pronounce. As much as I had this whole spiel about I'm pretty flexible about how my name is pronounced. I actually do care a lot about how I pronounce other people's names. So I'm going to try really hard. But Saira, right? I'm trying. Okay. So I actually grew up with a single mom. My parents divorced when I was 5 years old, and I have 2 other siblings, older brother, younger brother. And I think as a child, my memories growing up with a single mom were pretty specific to I actually saw her as a superhero for a majority of my childhood. I think I only recognized that she was actually a human being who could get hurt. Probably when I hit puberty, so middle school, and you're thrown into this new environment, and all these kids are a lot of hormones and battle royale of neurons are developing, and that's only when I realized I'm like, oh, she's a human being, and she could get hurt, she could die, And there was a very close call a couple of times, once in high school, and then once when I was in college, where she almost passed away. Thankfully, nothing happened. But I think I only start forming a relationship with my dad, a closer, better relationship with my dad, probably when I think after I graduated college. He was always kind of in my life, but like we only actually developed a relationship afterwards. So I think for me, the thing that I always remember was like just seeing how hard my mom was trying. Those are probably my best memories. And she always made time for me. But I also, when I look back, I'm like, oh yeah, no, that's when she was about to lose it. It was like, and as a kid, I remember like there was one time, this is a very specific memory. I was asking her how to spell. I had an assignment at school, and I was like, how do you spell only? Like she goes ONLY, and I'm like, okay, how do you spell good? It's like these words, and I remember I would ask her the same. I asked her again, like, how do you spell only again? And and this is going on for like a couple of minutes, and then she's just like, Quinn, I already told you how to pronounce this, like, or how to spell this. Just look at what you spelled previously. And I was like, oh shit. I was like, as a kid, like I just, and as a kid, I processed that. I was like, oh shoot, like I should listen to my mom. And now when I look back, I'm like, oh, that's my mom was like, she was losing it. She was probably trying to work, and this kid is going like, Mom, how do I do this? So I can only imagine how much more difficult that is during pandemic. I think the one thing that I and I'm not sure how this, because we're in the US is very like individualistic, like nuclear family, like you're sequestered to your own thing. I always wish that parenting could be almost more communal, like not that you're like give up your kid to your neighbor or you're like, see you, I'm out, but you could be like, I am so tired, I need a break, can someone please, can someone parent in the neighborhood like please watch my kid. Not that that's particularly safe during a pandemic, but I think just in general, like having that kind of help. I think I saw my mom struggle with that because she always felt very pressured that like I have to do it as a single mom, I have to do it by myself. And I wish I could just go back and tell her like, no, it's okay to ask for help. If that person doesn't want to help you, they're a dick. It's like, but it's more than acceptable to, I think that's what the one thing I'm like, it's more than acceptable to say like, I'm a parent, my kids think I'm a superhero. I'm not a superhero, but I have to keep this illusion. I am not a superhero. Can you help me keep this illusion going for as long as possible? Again, like I only realized probably when I was like in middle school, I was like, whoa, puberty? Oh, is this how my mom made me? It's like, these little realizations that you have. But I think, being like Saira, I completely commend you. Like everything you described, and like I know you mentioned you appreciate how you're privileged and you have all this like, you're able to work and stay at home, especially given the current reality. But it's also like same time it's like that, and it's still really hard. Like it's just hard. So I think you're doing a phenomenal job given the circumstances, and yeah.
Thank you so much for that. I hear it, and I really appreciate that. And I think it's hard for me to accept that. Like I like that I'm doing a good job. And one of the things, like my parents aren't divorced, but my mother really has done everything. Like when we grew up working poor, and I remember, we just never, like I couldn't do what other folks could do. Like the kids would go to the movies, and I couldn't do that because we couldn't afford any of that. And I just remember, my father had been unemployed for most of like 9 years, like when I was growing up, and my mom did so much. Like she would bring food to, like she would make all the food, she would keep everything clean, she would work, she would babysit neighbors' kids. Like there was all this stuff. And so to me, I was like, oh my God, my mother is an angel. Like she is the superhero, right? And so she set the bar so high. And then her food also. JR, have you ever tried my mom's food? Oh my God. Yeah. Like, and she like caters. She still has like got her catering hustle going. And so it's like, I feel like it's the mothers, right, that like hold it down for the family because we have to. And that's just what I saw growing up. And so when I got pregnant and I was like getting ready to have a kid, I was like, I am not going to be nearly as good as my mom. Like I'm gonna fuck up. I'm gonna fuck up hard. So I went into motherhood expecting inadequacy. Like I was not going to set a bar high. I was like, let me just set it real low so that I don't like live in this eternal disappointment. And I think I'm doing really well now because I set the bar so low. I'm like, I'll be inadequate. I'm gonna fuck up my kid. It's gonna happen. That's how it's gonna work. And so from a young age on, I tell my daughter, I'm like, you know what? I shouldn't have done that. Like, I think I'm sorry that like I reacted that way. Like that was my mistake. I make mistakes. And I just like, because it, like you, Q, I was like, oh, it took me, I think I was in grad school and in therapy for many years. And that's when I realized my parents were fallible. I was like, oh, y'all are like not superhuman. Oh, okay. So now I'm like, she's 5. I'm like, hey, I'm messed up all the time. Oh, I messed up here. Sorry about that. Oh, I'm still learning. I don't know. You know what I mean? And I'm like not the most patient person. So I think it's helpful to keep saying that to her. Like, hey, I messed up. I'm sorry. So that she knows that like we're in this together. Like she's teaching me how to be a mom. That's how it's going to go.
I think that's actually really great that you tell her, you're sorry and you mean it. It's like, that's actually, I'm really glad that you brought up, you're like, wait, hold on. Cause therapy, I'm also in therapy and like, I'm very grateful I still have it. And, it's one of those things that you talk and you're like, oh, my parents are not superhuman. They're very, like, my parents are both refugees and my dad left Vietnam when he's 20 years old. My mom's 16. Like that's very traumatizing. And I'm 31 and I'm still like, well, hold on. It's like kids, I mean, I want to have kids eventually, but it's just like, this is what you got to do. It's just all these little, and I'm like, this is hard, and if you're having kids, like my parents, they had kids when they were in their 20s and I'm like, I just got my second cat and I'm 31, it's like, and I'm very excited. This is the closest I can get to being a parent that counts. But I think the other thing too, it's like that you're willing to admit your mistakes. That's really good. Because I think my parents came from a generation where they just were not willing to admit mistakes. They were like, hey mom, I think you messed up. They're like, no, I'm pretty sure you didn't mean to do that. But but then as a kid, you're like, well, they're a superhero, they're perfect, they're infallible. And then you grow up, you're like, oh no, that was definitely a mistake. Hold on. And because the thing too is like kids remember. Like I still, as much as I love my mom and I have really great memories of her, there's still things I remember as a kid she would tell me, and I was like, yeah, no. It's like, and I understand where she was coming from, but I think it's also it's such a good example of like a willingness to, like, I don't think as a society we're very good at not succeeding. That's what I say. Like everyone's always like hell-bent on like, you have to be successful. But what happens when you do your best, put all your effort in like 150% and you still don't succeed? That's really hard. And I think the willingness to say, hey, it didn't work out, and be okay with that and get yourself back. Like you can be sad for a bit, but get yourself back up and learn from your mistake, keep learning, and like try again. I think that is a really good precedence because and it's also a really good, and I would say it's a direction of parenting that I really agree with, to like, still be a parent, like, hey, I'm your parent, I'm your mom, I'm not your buddy friend, but I am also going to, I'm going to hold myself to the same standards that I hold you to. So if I mess up, I'm going to say I'm sorry. If you mess up in the same thing, you have to say you're sorry, So I think it's really great that you're doing that. And I don't know. I also think the last thing I think is like, I think because I have friends who are moms, I think it is just, society is just really harsh on moms in general. Like from what the stories I've heard, the unsolicited, like one of my best friends, she was in a grocery store, literally just shopping when she was expecting her first kid. And this totally random, very sweet looking old woman walked up to her and was like, let me touch your belly and let me give you all this advice about how to give birth. And then she was like, oh yeah, don't do what was it? It was like, don't do a lumbar puncture, or, she's like, don't do that. And she's like, you can only be a real, like, you literally multiple people told her, you can only be a real mom if you feel pain. And my friend was like, I'm gonna get that fucking spinal tap. I don't care. I want it. It hurts. This is modern medical technology. Why the fuck do I want to feel all of that? Like, so I think it's we got a way to go to be like, I think it's hard for women, especially mothers. So I know you're like, your mom did a lot, and I know obviously she did a lot, but you're also remember, like, you're doing a lot too. Like, I'm just gonna put it out there. I don't think your mom did like the global pandemic shutdown, multiple months, stay at home, learning how to do literally everything that JR just mentioned of like teaching, parenting, homeschooling. It's like, I'm just gonna put it out there. I don't think your mom did that. So
Thanks for that. The thing about the epidural too. So I did not get the epidural, and I'm saying that because I want to say also there's no shame in that. Like, no one gets a fucking trophy for not getting fucking anesthesia when you're in childbirth. You know what I mean? Like, you need the epidural, get the fucking epidural. That's all there is to it.
True, yeah. And it kind of like, this made me think, of course, this pandemic has revealed a lot of ugly sides of our society, which a lot that we already know, but at the same time, it just kind of put all these issues, social issues up front. How we treat our essential workers, how, the role of teachers, like, remember for decades, states would cut fundings for teachers for schools. And because I was just reading that, because a lot of parents think that, like, oh, being teacher is easy. Why do they need to pay? Why do teachers need to get paid so much? Until when the pandemic hits, I was reading a couple posts that, like, a week into homeschooling, like, I think like 60 or 70% of these parents, moms, support giving raises to school teachers. I'm like, no shit. Like, this, like, you should have supported this even before the pandemic. So, and then, like, just these issues, like our social safety nets, how, the gender roles, even in this country, in a way, quote unquote, we are doing relatively better-ish, compared to many other countries, but still, like, the gender roles between fathers and mothers it's still not equal, it's just unfair. When it comes to cooperation, when it comes to jobs, there's different expectations of mother and fathers. As you two know that I teach, I get diversity inclusion training in the workplaces for local companies. And one example I keep hearing back is that in doing hiring process, when an interviewer heard that Bob has 3 kids, we were like, oh, cool, Bob, you have 3 kids. You must be a good dad. But when we heard that Katie has 3 kids, then we started thinking that, hey, will Katie be able to work full time and take care of the kids? But we never asked that question, that suspicion, whatever, never come up when Bob said that I have 3 kids. So just that gender inequality within the workplace, it's just not there, So I just,
I think, yeah, I actually just saw a great bit. She's so Congresswoman Katie Porter. I love her. She's in the House of Representatives. You just look her up, Katie Porter, if you haven't seen it. She does these great like whiteboards where she explains, like, when she breaks down the math for all these insane corporate millionaires.
nice.
And like, I love her. She was a professor at UCI, and she's the only single mom in Congress. She's only single mom. That's fucking crazy. And she had she ran the math. I mean, I really love her. I love her. She is funny, she's sassy, and she's like, and she ran a number. She said, look, our economic recovery is dependent on supporting women, especially mothers. She said mothers are asked so much to like take care of literally everything, and they have, we get 70 cents to the dollar. It's still a thing. It's insane. And she did the math like, if you want our economy to recover from this insane depression, it's not even a recession, it's a depression. It's like, you have got to create you have got to support, working women, working mothers, single mothers. You have to create a childcare social safety net. Like, I actually don't know on average how much childcare costs per se. I know it's in the thousands. It's insane. It's money. I'm like, what the actual hell? It's like, how can you? It's too much. Like, I don't know why childcare is so expensive, and so it's just like these various barriers, and that make it like almost it's like I'm gonna just put it out there, like, women are fucking superheroes, like, just by virtue of having like, if you can survive this system, you made it. And because, like, if you look at statistically, like, these numbers are absolutely, like, I'm gonna put it out there, like, the Bobs of this world have never dealt with that shit. I was like, dude, Bob, you're fine. But, like, the other thing too that was heartbreaking was to see, like, who was disproportionately affected by the recession, like, in the corporate workforce. It was women. They were like, yeah, pretty much almost every person who was furloughed in the corporate work life. So, like, they were either furloughed because you're like, oh, she has kids, like, we have to, yeah. Or it's like, oh, they felt pressured to, like, I have to take care of the kids at home, and my partner, my husband, or whoever, it's like, he has to go into work. And it's just like, I looked at the number, it was so insane and stark, and I was like, this is nuts, like, it should not be this way, but here we are. So I think, JR, like, I'm so glad you brought up the story, because I'm like, the key to like getting back is, like, we have to support everybody, especially the people who, like you mentioned, like, everybody who has for years been going on, like, you gotta support, mothers, you gotta support working mothers, you gotta support teachers, you gotta support healthcare workers, you gotta support everybody. And everyone's saying, like, oh, you were right. And we're all just sitting here like, yeah, no fucking shit. We said it for decades. I do hope that I'm more optimistic that change has to come, because there's no choice.
I'm shocked that it was mothers like who actually, it took a pandemic and remote learning to, like, understand that teachers are grossly underpaid. Cause I'm like, did you not put that together? Like that, I'm shocked. And dare I say, I'm like, let's look at the demographics of these women. Are they a lot of white women who think that?
Most likely.
That should surprise me. Okay. You know what I mean? Cause I'm like, I've known, and maybe because I have folks who are like friends in my communities who are teachers, and I'm like, y'all should just, like, not pay taxes. Is that an easy way to, like, solve this? Because this is fucked up, because it's like, teachers are responsible for, like, cultivating our future. Like, these children, you know what I mean? I've been battling curriculum stuff too. And I think that's been really hard for me in the pandemic working. Cause I'm like, they're learning about community helpers, things, and, like, they learn about police officers. And I have some opinions about that. And so then I'll, like, talk to my daughter about this, and then she'll be like, what? And then, like, the whole, like, debunking the fucking Thanksgiving myth. We've been having conversations about that. And she's like, the Pilgrims killed the indigenous people. It's like, yeah, they fucking did. Okay. And I'm like, how do I, like, teach alongside her, the curriculum, the bullshit curriculum, imperialist curriculum that they have to, like, indoctrinate these young kids? How do I do that while also, like, not freaking out this 5-year-old who's, like, in tears now because she learns that the Pilgrims are fucking murderers. Anyway, I'll stop there.
No, I mean, it's tough, because it's like, I just read, like, one of my favorite authors. His name is Viet Thanh Nguyen, and he has, about 3 years ago, he wrote this great op-ed in the New York Times. It's like, feeling, I think it's like feeling mixed on Thanksgiving. And, he talked about how he told at the time, his 4-year-old son, it's like, what's Thanksgiving about? He's like, genocide. It's like, that's what happened. And, it's like, it's not mutually exclusive. Like, it is a time to get together with people you love. And also remembering that, Columbus was bad. It was like, he is in, like, those pilgrims and Columbus and every colonist from Europe, they're in a bad place. Like, because it's like, the history and the curriculum too, and, like, understanding is, like, it just, like, there's so many things, like, what is good, what is bad, and that's a tough one. I commend you for engaging with your daughter, being like, let's look at this textbook, child.
I have a book called Rethinking Columbus, which is amazing, and it's meant for teachers. It's like a teaching aid. And I got that this year because I was like, I need help. I need some resources. And a lot of the resources are for older kids, right? But like I was like, I gotta do my best. And she's super sensitive. And so yeah, she's cried a lot. So I think I might have traumatized her.
I mean, it's tricky too, because like one, I mean, it's like we are in a good kind of pivotal moment where it's like you can't just be like, oh yeah, racism is dead in the U.S. and you got freaking KKK like everywhere, going like, we want a white ethno state, woo, white Christian ethno state. And I told my boyfriend that, and he's just like, wait, America's not already dead? It was like, which I was like, I mean, let's just be totally honest. It's like if over, like, you know, half of the population voted for that thing, you know, it's like, so
thanks white women. Thanks for that, white women.
Thank you.
So the latest thing is hashtag diaper dog.
Yeah, I think I will say like I think having these conversations early is really good for kids. It's really good because like, you know, I even just like having difficult conversations, like I think we tend to underestimate how much our kids can take. I mean, I use myself as a reference point because I was like, okay, I was taught about the Vietnam War. Like that's like actually a great one. You know, I'm Vietnamese, and American textbooks are always like, the Vietnam War is like the war America lost, and they never mention Vietnamese. They never talk about like how many Vietnamese people died. They never talk about like, you know, that JFK sent the CIA in to assassinate the president. You know, they don't talk about this stuff. You know, it's like the CIA was on History Channel being like, oh yeah, we killed him. They're like, I mean, they're like, yeah, we totally assassinated the president, the South Vietnam president. And and you know, I would read these textbooks. I was like, oh, that's weird. That was like one sentence to how many Vietnamese people died. And my parents were like, okay, so this is America's version of our history, and here's our recollection of. And I understood, like I understood the trauma of war, and I'm like, oh my god, like this happened. And so, and I was maybe probably 4. I was like, so I like was pretty aware of this shit. And I mean, it was, I don't think it traumatized me. It was just more like, okay, like let me, like I had this very like distinct viewpoint. So when I would read these textbooks, I was like, I would just, it was very inherent to me. I'm like, okay, this is the white people's version of my history, and I'm going to promptly ignore it because they don't know jack shit about it, you know. And I think, I mean, I knew all this stuff before like I was 10, and I was like, I'm really glad that my parents were very upfront about it. So I think kids are actually a bit more resilient. I mean, obviously you don't there's an age appropriateness to certain things, but it's like the content and the main message of like, hey, like this was not a good thing. I mean, actually another great example is like when I loved reading. I still love reading. I loved animals too. I went to the library and I saw a book called Animal Farm by George Orwell, which is yeah. And for those who aren't familiar, Animal Farm is a great, I guess, kind of like a euphemism for the rise of communism in Soviet Russia. I didn't know that. I didn't know Boxer was the working class being screwed over by people who were using it, like freaking Napoleon. Fuck Napoleon, by the way. And I walked to the counter, and I was like this little like 9-year-old kid, like bright-eyed. I was like, I'd like to borrow this, please. And the guy looks down and he's like, you know what this book's about? And I'm like, yeah, it's about animals. And they're on a farm. And he looks at me, he's like, okay. So he lets me borrow. I read the whole book, didn't understand anything. Then a few years later in high school, we read it for like my class, and I was like, oh shit, that makes sense now. You know, so there's certain things that kids aren't gonna quite get, you know, like the entire like metaphor and, you know, of Animal Farm. But, you know, it's not that we can't handle it. We just might not get certain abstract things. But then we eventually, like, it hits us. We're like, oh, that's communism. And like, or not communism per se. That is authoritarianism masked as communism. It's not even technically communism, to be perfectly honest. But, you know, it's like, but yeah. So I think it's good that I mean, it can be tough because kids cry, but I think it's good for them long term.
True, yeah, and and talking about again biased or misinformation. So the last blog that I wrote for November, and I was doing some research, and I found out that there's a society called the Mayflower Society, and they consist of the descendants of the Mayflower people, that the people, the pilgrims that came as Mayflower. So I guess there are about 10 millions of these descendants left, not left, that are around in this country. And the interesting thing was when I was looking through their website, you can look it up, Mayflower Society, their website. They talk about their history and all that. There's no mention of one word of the Native Americans, how they helped the pilgrims to survive. So pretty much they just you can read it. I'm just going to rephrase it. They just say something like the pilgrims suffered hardship greatly, but they survived and they founded the United States, the freedom, blah blah blah, and just skip over like everything. Like I was surprised that a society dedicated to pilgrims, history, or whatever, there's no mention of the people, the native people that helped their ancestor survive. And this is just bizarre.
It's part of the design though, right? Like you got to have this myth to legitimize your existence. And it's infuriating to me because, you know, we used to play, did y'all used to play Oregon Trail growing up? Like when you're in school,
Yeah.
Oregon Trail, how fucked up is that? You're like, let's play settler colonialism fucking game. Like, what the fuck? It's so fucked up. And people would, I think, you know, and I heard this a lot when I, you know, would organize around Palestine. And like, I feel like, and like a right of return and like a free Palestine. And people are like, well, isn't that how every place was founded? And you're like, actually, fucking no. Like, that's not true. Settler colonialism is a relatively new phenomenon. Okay. And this is like disgusting and it's relatively modern. And like, I learned, was it yesterday, 2 days ago? 1 in 4 Native families, 1 in 4 Indigenous families here on this continent go hungry. And we're fucking feasting on Thanksgiving. I'm not. And I probably will start fasting because fuck that. And it's like, how do you, and like, you know, you see families all getting together, pandemic or not. And I'm like, how do you hold that truth that like, you're not even recognizing and acknowledging that like, this is really fucked up. This is a day of mourning for so many people. And I get it. Like, I think it's cool to come together and I think it's cool to be grateful. And I think that's all great. We don't have to do that in November, you know, like I love the idea of having like a gratitude tree in your house. And I'm like, we should start that in January, like the beginning of, you know, the new year. That's like not really the lunar new year, but like this new year, whatever. And I'm like, that could be cool. But like, why do we have to do all these things in November? It just, I don't know. It's fucked up. I think it's, and the reality is like talking about Indigenous folks in the past tense is fucking wrong. Like folk are still organizing and Indigenous people are still resisting and the US it's still trying to fucking steal more land and shit. And you're like, is this not enough for you? Like, back off.
Yes.
God.
I was just reading that this administration just allow mining company to explore Apache land, protected land, like that. You know, like no regard. You know, we're talking about after what we know. You know what they have gone through, what they have suffered through, and we still allow this type of policy. It's bizarre.
Yeah,
think
you
it was
said
also,
oh, sorry.
go on. No,
I was
you
just
go
gonna
first.
say, I learned of a phone number. I learned about this yesterday. You can text this number and just text the number your city and state, and it'll tell you who were the original stewards of this land. It's fucking cool. It's a Canadian. I feel like, yeah,
Oh, wow.
And I know Canada's is rife with its own issues relative to Indigenous rights, but like it's much better than the fucking US in terms of like what's happening. I mean, anyway, I just think like in terms of like resources that I found, they're all Canadian. I'm like, oh, that's cool. It's land acknowledgement. So yeah, if you send a text to, well, anyway, maybe you can link to it. I don't feel like I should tell a phone number.
Sure, yeah,
Okay.
yeah.
It's really cool. I actually wanted to compliment your shirt. I'm like, I'm pretty sure it says Palestine. I'm like,
It says Palestine. I believe in
Right.
free Palestine and the right of return. And I think that like
Oh, yeah,
establishing
girl.
any state in Palestine that I think, I think what's happening is super racist over there. It's settler colonialism, which is inherently racist, and that's fucked up, and we gotta change it.
It's like colonialism, it's apartheid. I actually did a virtual 5K, like for, providing healthcare to Gaza Strip, because I was like, yeah, I can go on. So I'm like, all right, but yeah, I think what's also, so, I'm in public health, and I think that really pissed me off about this pandemic was like indigenous communities where like, I think the Navajo Nation had the highest death rate beyond New York City, beyond New Jersey. I was like, and they have like, their population density is less, obviously. And I was like, the scale of that death rate, like that's fucking great. And the nonprofit that I work with too, I think it was just like, we were like, the Navajo Nation is getting like hammered. They have literally, we were talking about the fucking bureaucracy, like the lack of anything. They have no resources. And so I saw this really great, I think, op-ed about like Indigenous Americans grappling with the sort of, like, they're like, Thanksgiving is always morbid for them every year, but this year is like particularly morbid because of COVID, and like kind of grappling with that history of like, culinary is going and be like, here's some blankets of smallpox, now die. It's like, and it's awful. I think one of the things I've taken a lot more optimism for is be like, look, I always kind of, I think family is really important, and it's important to me like tremendously. And I also like, we can accept that Thanksgiving is inherently about like the history of it was genocide, like physical, cultural genocide. When people think genocide, don't think, it's if you kill people. That's not it too. There's cultural genocide where you kidnap indigenous children from the parents, separate them, force them to like get rid of all their practices. I think it was only 40 years ago was the first time indigenous Americans were allowed to practice their like cultural heritage without being fined. That's fucking crazy. I was like, can't practice your own cultural heritage for like centuries. That's nuts, So I think one of the big things that I try to do into grappling with history is be like, yeah, history is uncomfortable. There's not the narrative like, oh, everything's peachy clean and everything is perfect. I'm like, like the more straightforward a piece of history looks to me, I'm like, I'm so skeptical. I'm like, it's like, oh yeah, blah 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 happened. I'm like, it was like the railroads magically appeared and no Chinese rail workers were involved. It's like, I think it's in a good way. It's like a lot of our baggage kind of came to the forefront, and sort of like, you can't put that baggage like away and can be like, it's never existed. You're like, nah, I see you. I see you all.
Yep. So I was looking up this organization recommended by my friend. It's called Native American Rights Fund. So people can donate to us. So I believe they do. They want to preserve tribal existence, the tribal land through legal means. And the donation goes to help with pay the legal bills and all these things, which is, I think, there's so many different issues, but at the same time, I think legally, um, they can use some help, because this country, people love to sue. And if you can afford good lawyers or great lawyers, the better you are. So I think that, equipped with supporting them with resources and funding to afford these lawyers, I think is a really good, a great step to support them.
Yeah, and I have to get running soon, but I actually want to end on a really positive note. So Arizona turned blue. It was super cool. People like, obviously, like the next vote came out, and everyone, I was like, yeah. But the one thing that was actually really amazing about Arizona, was when I looked at the demographics of the Indigenous Americans who came out to vote, oh my God, like over 99% were like, you know, it was, and I kind of looked at it, I was like, they face voter intimidation. Like there was fucking voter intimidation everywhere. It was insane. And barriers to even voting, like and during a pandemic, and they still came out to vote. I was like, look, like we owe you so much. So any funds to help, I will, you know, I'm like, you want PP? Oh, I got your PP. You want, like, you need funds for your legal fees? I got your, you know. And I think it was, if anything, it was just demonstrating, I'm like, you know, you can still make a huge difference when literally everything, history, the federal government, pandemic is stacked against you. You can still make something happen. I know, again, everyone focuses, and yeah, I'm like, huge shout out to Latinx vote, hell yeah. But like, I really wanted to focus on like these small groups of people who are like, who've always been ignored. Like, I mean, our politics are always like, the electoral college is like, people always focus on Ohio or Pennsylvania or fucking Florida for some reason. Florida is so unreliable anyways, so I don't know why. But, you know, they ignore smaller communities like, you know, Indigenous Americans. And like, you have no voting power. Why the fuck should I vote? You don't care about you. And they still what they really, like, you look at the margins, you're like, and you look at those numbers, you're like, oh damn, like that really did it. They really like made sure that difference was like high enough to be like, you can't contest this shit. So, but yeah.
Exactly. Cool. Yeah. How about you, Saira? Any last thoughts or notes that you want to share?
Oh, I just thought that was a beautiful note to end on. I would just say, like, you know, there's power in the collective. There's people power. So, like, you know, it can feel really daunting when you look at the U.S. imperialist machine. But like, you know, we're at a crossroads right now. Like, now we need to hold the new administration accountable and like push, and we can do that when we're collective power.
Yes, exactly. Yeah. So yeah, and I just want to end this to that. You know what? I feel hopeful. You know, I hopeful. Even though yesterday, for the first time in a long time, I didn't do anything for Thanksgiving. I didn't go anywhere. Did I feel alone? Yeah, a little bit. At the same time, I feel great. I feel good. You know, in multiple levels. You know, because of course COVID. You know, I don't want to spread this thing, and at the same time, it's just like, you know, yes, it's a holiday. At the same time, it's just another day. And just another day that, on top of that, just another day that many people, like what we talked about earlier, that have suffered that morning. So I think my high note at that to the end is that, like, you know, every day can be a great day if we want to be. You know, if we really want to be thankful, every day is a thankful day. You know, that's why through my teaching, through my blog, I always emphasize this, like, daily gratitude. You know, say thanks, not just on Thanksgiving Day. That's just bullshit. This is useless. This is like, go to church once a week to paint and just do whatever the fuck you want throughout the week. What's the point of that? Anyway, I know. I just opened a whole can of worm right there. But anyway, for me, is be thankful every day, and I just practice gratitude, and I think that will make our life more meaningful and happier. So, all right, I just want to thank Saira, be our special guest today.
Thank you so much for having me.
Oh yeah, definitely. Thank you so much. And of course, my partner in crime, Q. So thank you all for watching and listening. So, all right then, see you all probably next week. So, bye.
Bye.